Take a moment and observe the world around you. Not just the buildings, the movement, or the endless stream of people rushing from one place to another. Look deeper than that. Listen carefully. There is a constant noise beneath everything. A restless energy that never seems to stop. Notifications, opinions, arguments, explanations, reactions. Everyone speaking at once. Everyone trying to be noticed. Everyone afraid of disappearing into silence. And most people never escape it. They become absorbed by the chaos without realizing it. They speak not because they have something meaningful to say, but because silence makes them uncomfortable. They stay busy not because their actions matter, but because slowing down would force them to confront themselves. Every empty moment must be filled. Every pause must be interrupted. Stillness begins to feel dangerous to them. But what most people never realize is this. The more reactive a person becomes, the less control they actually possess. Because real strength has never come from constant movement or endless expression. True strength is built through restraint, through clarity, through the ability to remain steady while everything around you loses balance. Long before modern life became consumed by distraction, the Stoics understood this truth. They understood that a person unable to govern their own thoughts would eventually be ruled by the world around them. Someone incapable of directing their attention would spend their entire life reacting instead of choosing. And slowly, over time, society began confusing noise for importance. People started mistaking busyness for progress, emotional reaction for authenticity, constant expression for confidence, distraction for purpose. But if you observe carefully, the people who are truly grounded move differently. They are not desperate to explain themselves. They are not controlled by every emotion. They do not feel the need to respond to everything immediately. There is something calm about them, something measured, a quiet discipline that keeps them centered while others are constantly pulled in different directions. The mind moves quickly, faster than most people notice. One moment you feel completely fine, and then suddenly one comment, one look, one unexpected event shifts everything inside you. Thoughts begin multiplying. You replay conversations. You imagine arguments that never happened. You predict outcomes that may never come. Entire emotional realities are created inside your head without a single thing changing in the outside world. And strangely, it feels productive. It feels like preparation, like awareness, like control. But most of the time, it is none of those things. Most overthinking is not solving problems. It is feeding anxiety. It is attention being consumed by things that do not exist. People develop a habit of treating every thought as important. Every fear feels urgent. Every emotion demands a response. The mind produces an endless stream of noise, and instead of questioning it, people obey it automatically. But most thoughts are not wisdom. Many are old fears repeating themselves, old insecurities searching for attention, old patterns replaying out of habit. Yet people carry them as though they are truth. That is why so many minds become exhausted. Not because life itself is unbearable, but because their attention is constantly trapped inside unnecessary mental conflict. The shift begins the moment you realize something simple but powerful. Just because a thought appears does not mean it deserves your belief. You are not required to follow every fear. You are not required to argue with every emotion. You are not required to react to every mental impulse. The Stoics never tried to stop thoughts from appearing. They understood that the mind naturally produces them. What mattered was learning which thoughts deserved attention and which should be released without attachment. Because when every thought feels urgent, the mind becomes a battlefield. You stay tense, alert, reactive, always preparing for danger, always anticipating problems. Eventually, anxiety becomes your normal state. But the mind can be retrained. And the process begins in a very quiet way. You stop reacting immediately. Instead of following every thought, you pause. Instead of feeding every fear, you observe it. Instead of becoming trapped inside mental noise, you allow it to pass through you without resistance. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Most people are addicted to mental stimulation. They feel compelled to analyze everything, explain everything, predict everything. Silence inside the mind feels unfamiliar. But when you stop chasing every thought, something unexpected happens. Space appears, and within that space, clarity begins to form. True clarity does not come from thinking more. It comes from removing what is unnecessary. Slowly, patterns begin revealing themselves. The same worries, the same assumptions, the same imagined disasters repeating again and again. And once you see those patterns clearly, they begin losing their power over you. You stop identifying with every emotion. You stop believing every fear. You stop reacting automatically. That is where control quietly returns. Not control over the world. Not control over circumstances. Control over your attention. And attention shapes everything. Whatever consistently holds your attention eventually shapes your character, your emotions, your direction, and your life. Every distraction costs energy. Every unnecessary reaction drains focus. Every emotional impulse steals clarity. When your attention is scattered across everything, there is nothing left for what truly matters. This is why disciplined thinking changes everything. Not because thinking is bad, but because undirected thinking slowly destroys peace. The moment you begin choosing where your mind goes instead of allowing it to wander endlessly, your inner world starts changing. Situations that once overwhelmed you begin feeling manageable. Emotional reactions that once controlled you become weaker. The need to constantly predict and prepare starts fading. And in its place, something steadier appears. Calm. Not forced calm. Not artificial calm. A natural steadiness created by mental clarity. You begin noticing something else too. The less reactive you become, the more aware you become. You listen more carefully. You observe more deeply. You notice details other people completely miss. Because while most people are trapped inside emotional reaction, you begin creating distance between stimulus and response. And inside that distance, choice becomes possible. That is where real discipline begins. Not in controlling the world around you, but in controlling how you respond to it. This same principle changes the way you speak. When the mind is chaotic, speech becomes chaotic as well. People begin speaking impulsively, not because their words matter, but because silence feels uncomfortable. Conversations become performances. Everyone trying to prove themselves. Everyone trying to explain themselves. Everyone trying to avoid being overlooked. And over time, constant expression weakens the value of words. When everything is said, nothing carries weight anymore. But restraint changes this. The moment you begin slowing down before speaking, you notice how much of what you wanted to say was unnecessary. At first, silence feels strange. There is pressure to respond quickly. Pressure to explain yourself. Pressure to fill every pause. But eventually, something changes. Silence stops feeling empty, and awareness begins taking its place. You begin listening instead of waiting to speak, observing instead of reacting, understanding instead of performing. And strangely, your presence becomes stronger because of it. Because words chosen carefully carry weight. People pay closer attention not because you are louder, but because you are deliberate. This does not mean becoming cold or distant. It means becoming intentional. Understanding that not every opinion needs to be shared. Not every argument deserves participation. Not every silence requires interruption. That selectivity becomes a form of self-respect. And over time, it develops into something even deeper. Quiet confidence. A confidence no longer dependent on constant validation or endless explanation. Because when you stop trying to prove yourself through words, your actions begin speaking for you. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that controlled speech reflects a controlled mind, and a controlled mind creates a stable life. The same principle applies to focus. Most people live with divided attention. Their minds constantly pulled toward distractions, unfinished tasks, endless stimulation, and temporary pleasures. This creates the illusion of movement, but not real progress. Because attention divided too many times loses its power. Real growth requires depth. Depth requires focus. Focus requires discipline. Yet most people abandon focus the moment discomfort appears. The second something becomes difficult, the mind looks for escape. A distraction, a new idea, a temporary comfort. But every time you abandon focus impulsively, you strengthen inconsistency. And inconsistency slowly destroys momentum. The people who accomplish meaningful things are not always more talented. Often, they are simply more focused. They stay with difficult things longer. They resist distraction longer. They continue when others stop. That is what creates depth. And depth changes everything. Over time, Focus stops feeling like effort and starts becoming identity. You no longer chase everything. You no longer say yes to everything. You stop allowing random distractions to decide the direction of your life. Instead, you move deliberately, and deliberate action creates stability. This becomes even more important when emotions enter the picture. Because emotions are powerful. Anger demands reaction. Fear demands escape. Insecurity demands reassurance. And in the moment, emotions feel permanent. They create urgency, pressure, a feeling that something must happen immediately. That urgency is what controls most people. They react instantly, speak impulsively, act emotionally. But something remarkable happens when you pause before reacting. Even briefly, you begin separating feeling from action. You still feel the emotion, but you are no longer controlled by it. That small gap changes everything. Because the moment you stop obeying every emotion automatically, self-mastery begins. This does not mean suppressing emotion. The Stoics never taught emotional numbness. They taught awareness, the ability to experience emotion without surrendering control to it. Anger can exist without becoming destruction. Fear can exist without becoming paralysis. Doubt can exist without controlling your decisions. That is strength, not the absence of emotion, but the ability to remain steady within it. Most people never develop this because they mistake intensity for truth. Something feels urgent, so they assume it must be important. Something feels emotional, so they assume it must be correct. But emotions are temporary states, not reliable commands. The disciplined mind learns to pause before obeying them. And over time, that pause becomes natural. You begin noticing triggers earlier, recognizing patterns faster, understanding yourself more clearly. Instead of being carried away by every emotional wave, you begin standing firmly beneath it. That creates a completely different way of living. You become less reactive, less scattered, less emotionally dependent on external circumstances. And in place of chaos, something steadier emerges. Inner stability. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger. As your awareness deepens, another realization appears. You begin noticing where your energy is actually going. The conversations that drain you, the distractions that consume you, the habits quietly wasting your attention every single day. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. You realize how much energy disappears into things that never truly mattered. Endless scrolling, pointless arguments, constant stimulation, unnecessary worry. Gradually, you begin stepping back from it. Not dramatically, not aggressively, quietly. You stop giving your attention to everything. You become more selective, more intentional. And because of that, your energy begins gathering instead of scattering. That changes how life feels. Your mind becomes lighter. Your focus becomes stronger. Your actions become more deliberate. You stop reacting to every distraction and start moving according to direction instead of impulse. And eventually, all these shifts begin connecting together. Thinking less, speaking less, reacting less, distracting yourself less. Not because you are withdrawing from life, but because you are finally becoming present within it. At some point, the goal stops being changing the world around you and starts becoming mastering yourself within it. Less noise, less chaos, less reaction, more clarity, more awareness, more control. And in that quiet transformation, everything begins changing. Everything else begins to fall into place. If this resonated with you, don't let it end here. There's another video on your screen that will take this even deeper. Watch it and keep building that discipline. And thank you for being part of Stoic Sounds.